All right. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome. We are so glad that you are here. We'll get started in just a few minutes. I have a couple items that I have to go through first before I pass it over to our speakers. We'd like to remind everyone of our commitment to maintaining a safe and accountable space. If you experience issues and need assistance, please reach out to me by sending me a direct message found at the top right corner of the event. To walk you through the tools in this session, I'd like to draw your attention to the vertical bar featuring several icons on the right side of your screen. If your event feed is open, it's going to be hiding your vertical bar, so please close the event feed by clicking on the X in the upper right-hand corner of that box. Once you've closed your event feed, you'll be able to see a vertical bar with several icons. You'll see speech squares, that's the chat box for the session, the Q&A icon. Please use that to ask the presenters questions. You can also vote for questions if you're very interested in hearing the answer to that question. Upvote it and it'll bump it up the list. There's an icon of people indicating the participants in the session. And lastly, you'll see two papers stacked on top of one another. These are all the resources from the presenter, including the slide deck for this session. To enable us to keep up with questions, we ask that you please only use the Q&A icon to share your questions with the speakers. And if at any time during the session you need to step away, take a break, debrief, or decompress, please feel free to do so. We've got a wellness room, which you can navigate that by the top bar of your screen. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for this session. Starting off, we've got Abdul Hai Thomas. He is a former Marine Corps member, graduated from Ohio State University with a Bachelor of Arts in English before pursuing advanced degrees in education and leadership from Columbia University and Vanderbilt University, respectively. Now settled in Jacksonville, Florida, he serves as the Director of Youth Participatory Action and Research at the Center for Children's Rights, utilizing his experience in community-based research and restorative justice to advocate for children's rights and integrate youth participation into Jacksonville's system of care. And we have Dimitri Brewer, who is a remarkable youth advocate who has dedicated the past 3 years to making a difference at Jacksonville Center for Children's Rights. His efforts have led to the expansion of their program into schools, healthcare systems, and beyond. Dimitri's passion for improving lives shines through his work, making him a standout in his field. And to round us off, we have Addison Sims, who is a Jacksonville native and first-generation American. Starting out in child welfare and social work, Addison has transitioned to the realm of restorative justice through his work with the Jacksonville Center for Children's Rights. Currently pursuing a master's in restorative justice at Vermont Law, he's committed to promoting healing and justice within his community. Thank you so much, everyone. We're so glad you're here, and now I will pass it over to Abdul Hai.
All right, everyone, thank you for joining today's session. We are here. This is our second year here at the System of Care Virtual Summit. And last year we presented on a very specific scope of work that we were working on, something called the Youth Action Series, and how we're using it as a community of practice to do restorative justice work, youth participation work, and children's rights work. So this year, we are going to get a little bit further into the weeds, and we're going to talk about what we're specifically doing in Jacksonville system of care, kind of in the education sector, in the health sector, in the juvenile justice sector. So our presentation is titled Restorative Justice and Restorative Practices, Anytime and Any System. So today we really have 3 learning objectives. The first is we're going to define restorative justice and restorative practices. Then we're going to examine and highlight how these restorative justices, how these restorative justice practices are used by respective and various system of care providers. And then we will also develop restorative justice and restorative practice communities of practice. So this will give us an opportunity to do a little networking, to share experiences, identify some shared learnings, some commonalities, and some barriers that we may have in our system of care work. So we want to get through the presentation. Probably in about 30 minutes or so. And then we want to leave a lot of time for open discussion so we can begin to exchange ideas and start to become that community of practice here. So I'm going to turn it over to Dimitri, and Dimitri is going to take a moment and talk to us a little bit about what restorative practice is and what it is not.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dimitri Brewer, the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Jacksonville Center for Children's Rights. Can you slide to the next slide? So again, restorative justice emphasizes bringing together everyone affected by wrongdoing to address needs and responsibilities and to heal the harm and to repair relationships and community. Restorative justice is also a proactive relational strategy to create a culture of connectivity where all members of a community thrive and feel valued. Restorative justice is about interconnectedness. Restorative justice is both about building community and responding to harm within the community. Right here, you're looking at the three pillars of what we call restorative justice for CCR. One is building community. I need to move that real quick. Repair relationship within community and reintegrate and rejoin community. So how we reintegrate and rejoin community, we support reentry and reintegration by, if we're looking in the spectrum of the youth that's been the delinquent youth, we support them through and through with our resilience navigation. We build community by our primary focus, which are those community circles, those connective circles that we do within the community by building different environments. Then we repair relationship within community by dialogue building and conferences, we respond to conflict and repair harm. So that's maybe when two youth might go at it, or a youth and an adult, something might happen and that wrongdoing happens. We intervene and we then participate in those community conferences and community circles to repair that harm within the community.
All right. So we'll go back very quickly. And one of the things that we do in our restorative practice is, we really facilitate everything through a connection circle. So this connection circle is specifically to build community, to tell stories, to move, and also do a lot of reflection. So what we do is we create a container in the work. So restorative practice is not kind of an A to B or A to Z process. Kind of like you do this and you get that, or you do this and you get that. Restorative practice is very, very open. And what we do as an organization is we really create the container for conversation to happen, for relationships to take place. So restorative practice and restorative justice is really not about what we're thinking. It's really about what we're feeling, within those actions, within those behaviors, and also within those relationships that are taking place. So one of the things that we often run into when we begin to facilitate in different sectors of Jacksonville system of care, everybody is really expecting if you do A, you get B. And so there's really a cultural shift and a process shift in the way that we think, in the way that we approach this work. And so Addison is going to take some time to talk about the specific restorative practices that we're using in the various systems of care here in Jacksonville.
Thank you, Abdul. Hi. So here we have examples, or rather a dynamic of how our restorative practices work. So in the middle, you could kind of, between these two ends of a spectrum, in the middle, you could kind of imagine harm. Not so much harm in an incident, but harm as a dynamic. So the preventative side of hoping to address harm, especially with youth in our community, is through connection circles. Connection circles give youth an opportunity to have open discussion and dialogue, as well as to express themselves, and as well as understanding other people's perspectives. So as we hold community circles in these youth serving organizations, after school programs, schools, youth usually don't have the opportunity to have open, safe dialogue. That's where a lot of, violence, that's where a lot of aggression comes from. What we would see as a seemingly small incident would occur, and they hold on to that. And as they hold on to that, negative emotions build up, resentment builds up, conflict builds up, and then it spills over. And that's where we see those incidents. So it's not so much about the incident, it's about what happened and what's happening for the multiple people involved. So after that, you could say incident happens, we try to use what's called intervention. So as an incident happens, the dynamic is still continuing. We use what's called an accountability process. So we take the people who are involved and we offer everyone an opportunity to speak what was happening for them, why it happened, and how we can go about fixing it and how we can prevent it from happening again. So then we have our community engagement circles. So that isn't so much as school-based. That's bringing different. It could be intergenerational. That's bringing different groups of people together. So we've used community engagement circles with law enforcement and youth in the community. We've used community engagement circles with community safety officers, resource officers in schools and youth. We've used that with teachers and youth. So usually that's through groups of people who represent different aspects of the community. That's hopefully to reduce or prevent incidents or conflict happening between those few groups. And then the intervention side of that would be an expansion circle. So an example of an expansion circle would be currently at the juvenile detention center, we hold expansion circles, which is using the circle structure and safe space for usually two people who are used to community violence. So youth who have experienced gun violence or have experienced, gang activity or things like that. We sit them down together and we give them a safe space to actually express their experiences, and they kind of realize, we live very parallel lives. And that helps them see things from another person's perspective, and not just as a target for violence, but as something who's going through an experience just like themselves. And then we have our police community dialogue. So that hopefully will, prevent or reduce incidents of issues between police and between people who usually don't have a good view of the police. So that's the preventative side. And then the intervention side is after something does happen with the police, we have what's called a victim offender dialogue. So, throughout the normal court process, victims don't usually have a voice. It's you prove that something happened, you prove who did it, and then it all becomes how much time, what the intensity of the punishment is for the person who offended. The victim offender dialogue gives the person who was harmed the floor and the opportunity to express their experience and the effects of that experience on their lives, the people who love them, through their circle of influence. And then we have what's called rise circles. Rise circles are like a celebration for that reintegration. So if we have a youth coming out of the detention center, he or she were there for months, they were there for months, it becomes very difficult on how to rejoin your community after you've become honestly institutionalized by another community it's not an organic or natural community. That's something created by the carceral system and the very punitive system of the detention center. So it's very difficult to come back to the natural and organic community. So we find ways to bring in people who are from their natural community to welcome them back in. So it'll be a family member, it can be your neighbor, just someone who supports you, someone who cares about you. And usually we have professionals, whether it's a counselor, whether it's someone that has something to do with, it could be cure violence, it could be a tutor, anyone. It's usually the person who the rise circle is for, they get to determine who's there. So it's not just like an intervention or some type of like bum rush situation. They get to decide who's there. Would you like this person here? Would you like that person there? And they get the final say so, because it is their story we're working on, trying to reintegrate them into the community. Then we have what's called SOYP, State of the Young People Collective. That's our youth participatory collective, where all youth are welcomed and they're not empowered, but we walk along them, giving them the opportunities, the connections, giving them access to people who do determine their lives, whether it's educational, juvenile justice, political. We give them opportunities to work with those professionals in a more youth-centered space. Instead of just talked at, they get to talk with those professionals. And then we have our quote at the bottom. Restorative practices are about relationships and our feelings in relationship with ourselves to others. So that's individual, that's group, that's intergenerational. It creates equity, not just equality, but it creates equity among youth and the people who are supposed to be serving them. And then you see our QR code at the bottom. That's what we call our emotions and sensations wheel. We use that in every setting possible, whether it's usually it could be youth coming through a RISE circle, they're reintegrating. It's hard to navigate those feelings coming back to your community after you've been institutionalized. We use those with youth at our alternative education programs. We use that with youth and resilience navigation. That's very much a cornerstone of what we do. So you can definitely take a picture or bring your camera up to that QR code, and it'll show you a very, very powerful tool we use very often.
And I think one thing that Addison said that needs to be highlighted, we don't empower anyone. We let them know that their power, and we walk along with them. That's the big thing. We're with and not over. And I think that's what we highlight big in everything we do. Like that's the biggest thing of what we do at CCR.
Yeah, and to add to that point, Dimitri, the one thing that we also have to remind ourselves is that we are restorative justice practitioners ourselves. So the thing that we really focus on is that we're also being transformed by the work as practitioners.
Sure.
That is the important piece. So these tool sets and these tool kits and these skills that we are working with people to implement in their own lives, we're actually doing it ourselves. So the Center for Children's Rights is very, very focused on doing, what we're trying to practice externally is what we're practicing internally. So we have these restorative practices baked in and integrated into all of our really day-to-day interactions, our meetings.
Sure.
We're always in circle together, and we're always looking for opportunities to really flex and build that restorative mindset.
Yeah.
And then I also want to add, one more thing to what Addison mentioned is, as people are navigating back into, these different settings, spaces, and contexts, it's important to understand how to identify the feelings that they're feeling, right? So even as research practitioners, there are some feelings that we don't know how to identify. And through practicing and through this work, we're learning to identify these ourselves. So that's probably one of the most important things that we emphasize, is making sure to be able to identify these feelings and kind of their impact on your perception or your behavior or your word choice or what actions that you take. So if we go back here, just looking at the color coding, this green is intervention, the blue is prevention, and the yellow is the reintegration piece, right? So as you see here, the connection circles, community engagement, police community dialogue, this is all about, as Addison said, navigating these dynamics that exist and really building community here. Then with the accountability, the expansion circle, the victim offender, this is where we are responding to conflicts, repairing harm, and also trying to prevent those also. So with restorative justice and restorative practices aren't very, there's some reactionary piece to it, but also it is also preventative at the same time. And then we see here with the RISE circles, this is where we reintegrate and rejoin community. And then the one thing that's special about State of the Young People, or SOYP, as you see here, this is a comprehensive collective and a comprehensive space where all of these things are happening simultaneously, but they're happening with different youth that we're working with. They're happening with different adults and community partners and system of care providers that we're working with. So this is like really the comprehensive container to where juvenile justice connected youth are in State of the Young People, or SOYP. Our system of care providers are connected with those youth and having conversations with those youth. We also have SOYP members who are in the most elite high schools and college, early college enrollment. So it's really, SOYP is not specific to any particular youth. It's open for all youth, and it's really focused on this sense of radical belonging. So the one thing that we focus on here is that the system of care is built from, with, and through relationships. And this is one of the biggest insights we've discovered over the past couple years, is that the system of care isn't really a top-down mechanism. It's really a reflection of all of these small interactions, right? So it's the aggregate of all of these small interactions. So the way that we approach it is we focus on cultivating those small interactions, those social interactions, those relationships, kind of those day-to-day interactions. That's where we're doing our work here. So we want to give everybody a moment just to kind of digest what we've said so far. So the question is, what are some barriers that that you have in taking the first step to begin to maybe facilitate some of these restorative justice practices and restorative practices into your day-to-day work? Or what are some opportunities that are really conducive to taking that first step, or have you already taken that first step? So we want to give the audience a moment to share with us. We'd love to hear.
And I think while we're waiting on responses, we can give short examples of those same questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Thought you was gonna start it off, but no. I can even say with these restorative practices, I've been coaching sports for the last 6 years, and it has been a complete shift in youth interaction and relationships through using and adopting and completely becoming one with these restorative justice practices. So I seen that firsthand with the youth that I work with, coaching high school football, coming to a new field, So seeing that complete shift with a complete mindset changing of just the way I'm talking with youth, the way I'm letting them lead and not letting them lead, the way they know how to lead, I guess just not knowing where to start with implementing those practices. Bex Flowers. Do we have an answer to that, or thought process that we can go through with that?
I would honestly say starting personally. Speaking from my own experience, it really does start with embodying yourself in it on a personal level. And then as it starts to become a part of your lens, a part of your theory, your pedagogy for how the world works, how you can exist in society, it kind of just it starts to naturally root in your work. It starts to naturally root in how you operate with youth, or how you operate with system of care members, how you operate with care providers, how you operate with stakeholders. It just becomes a way to exist once you implement it, I would say, in your personal life, in your day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. I can double down on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely say, prior to becoming a restorative justice practitioner, I was in the school system here in Jacksonville for, a little, over 10 years. And I have an opportunity to reflect on, my interactions with youth during that little more than a decade. And, at times, I hold my head down in shame, because I was a system of care provider. And, my social interactions and personal interactions with some youth, did cause harm. So, it's given me an opportunity to reflect on that. And it's also given me opportunity to run into some of those students that, are now graduates or now parents themselves. And, some students that I was just teaching a few years ago, and apologize and just say, I'm really sorry about how I was, interacting with you. And, I was irresponsible in how I was engaging with you and leveraging my position as a teacher. And it's just given me the tool set and some of the skills, the ability, and the capacity to recognize that harm, admit that I caused that harm, and to apologize for it, and and give space and context for that other person to recognize that it did happen to them, because there is such a power dynamic between a teacher and a student. Sometimes the students don't feel like it's harm. They feel like it's a normal dynamic where some of this, mistreatment or, leveraging of power and positionality, it doesn't look like or seem like it's harm, but it really is. So I've had conversations with previous students. They were like, you know what? I never thought, I just thought it was a normal interaction. But now that you think about it, it was harmful to me. And, so they show that they appreciate that I was able to have that conversation. So do we have anyone from the audience who has any experience with restorative justice, or has some barriers that they've experienced, or, things that are really conducive? And so I can't see the chat here because I'm sharing my screen. So Demetria,
I can
Addison, do you
see
see
it.
anything?
We haven't got any responses yet.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. So Addison, do you want to talk a little bit about how we can begin to build some of that restorative mindset and flex some of that muscle?
Definitely. So we could relate it either to the prompt here, or we can kind of just keep it in conversational.
we can relate it to the prompt.
Yeah. Okay. So, so you see the title, "Build a Community in Your Setting." I think one of the barriers for me, even early on, was seeing this as like big picture, and seeing this. We're so used to, when we hear like phrases like implementing practice, we think of like policy and procedural and code, and it doesn't always have to be so big. It can be very small. So facilitation is a skill, but it's a very implicit skill. It's a muscle you build through, repeated reps. You can only get better at it as you do it. So facilitation is in the most simple way, in most simple terms, it's just creating a safe container for people to build a relationship and repair a relationship. That's all facilitation.
Does facilitation look the same in different places?
Absolutely no and yes. So facilitation, it always should be relative to who you're working with. It should always be relative to who you're working with. And facilitation also comes from getting to know people. So you do have to understand that you're in other people's space. So facilitation can't be just something you use as like a wide brush over everyone. That's something I've learned as well. Do you think empathy is an important foundation of restorative justice? Absolutely, but definitely empathy over sympathy. Sympathy can definitely undermine restorative justice, but empathy is definitely important, because if you can't understand and identify with other people's emotions and experience, you can't repair relationship.
Yeah, and I think that goes right into community agreements.
Yeah, exactly. It's a perfect segue. So community agreements are what keeps that safe container consistent and safe. So community agreements, we usually use 4 very basic ones, but youth, adults, whoever we're working with usually add their own agreements. But our community agreements are always try to be brief to respect everyone's time, speak from the heart, be spontaneous, and then if harm ever occurs, we can address it, or we can, if need be, that person can leave the circle, we can address it, personally, or we can end the circle if need be.
So with those community agreements, that's where that empathy comes into place. When they add their agreements,
right?
We add our agreements. That's why we're keeping it lean. We say brief or lean. That's why we're saying it from the heart, so we can keep those emotions and those feelings in the circle, and to be able to agree to those.
Right. And then usually after we do our community agreements, we do what's called a check-in question. So that's just something to like prick the surface. I don't like to use the word icebreaker because a lot of times that ice is valuable. That does let you know who people are, where they're at, what they're coming into the space with, what they're carrying, what they're holding, right? Everyone's holding something. So So a check-in question is just something to kind of loosen up our brain, tease it a little bit, and let us connect back to our natural selves, whether it's your inner child, whether it's just where you are emotionally, instead of just residing within your role, right? Because wherever you meet someone, they're in a role, whether it's professionally, whether it's in their family as a caretaker, whether you're a kid, you're just thinking, I'm a student, I'm a subordinate. So those check-in questions bring back out the humanness. And it's oftentimes it's something silly. Do you do cereal first or milk? And it kind of breaks down a lot of those barriers that we hold and that we use on the daily. And then after we try to bring out that humanness, we get into mindfulness or movement. So it can be a very, involved somatic practice, or it could be something very simple like box breathing, counting 3 seconds, inhale, 5 seconds, exhale, repeat. And we can do that a few times just to level the playing field, help everyone kind of center and kind of let go of whatever they came into the space with. Whether you're a teacher and you're stressed about reports and you're stressed about testing, or you're focused on what you have to do later in the day, or you had a behavior incident previously, it kind of gets rid of it. You can never get rid of that, but it helps you kind of center and bring you here where you're at now in this space. And that's what keeps the space safe as well. And then we get into what's called play, games, fun, whatever you want to term it. But we do something fun. We'll play a game. It could be like a word game. A lot of times we'll get up and we'll play some type of like complicated counting game. It helps people focus, and also can sometimes build up a little, healthy competition. You can see like some of that natural frustration come up. And it helps you build with each other. It helps build a relationship if you're all working towards a common goal, or if you're competing with each other. Both of those can build community and build relationship on the same level. And then we'll get into shared storytelling. That's usually where things get deeper. And we'll have like a few prompts, and it can also be open and people can suggest prompts. But usually we'll have a few prompts, and those prompts go around each person, and each person answers the prompt from their perspective and from their experience. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no expected answer. We have a saying: the wisdom is in the circle. The power is in the circle. The power is in the people who are present. So that's where that's usually where the meat of the circle can be, is in that shared storytelling. And then we have a closing. Usually we close it with about gratefulness. We'll close it about hope. We'll close it about forgiveness, whatever theme emerges from that shared storytelling leads into the closing. So that's the normal flow of a circle, but it can definitely be tinkered with.
So as Addison mentioned, these are the components of a connection circle. But in your organization or in your system of care, or if you want to start kind of building this muscle, you can do these in piecemeal, right? You don't have to do these all in one, kind of trajectory. So when we put together a circle, we use these to create a trajectory. And so at first, as Addison mentioned, when we kind of get into the circle, there's a little bit of ice, but that's necessary because you see at the end of it that ice, metaphorically speaking, and figuratively speaking, has melted, and it's just a lot of warmth that exists within the circle. So we have these very specifically. So we use this as kind of a trajectory of how we move through. So we start with the community agreements to check in, just to kind of get moving. We play, get moving a little bit, and then we do the mindfulness and the movement, either to calm ourselves down from the games that we played, or to settle us, because maybe we were telling a story and we got deep and we began to share some stories that started to strike up some emotion within the circle. And then, we close out. So again, just to reiterate, you can do these in piecemeal. So if you have a meeting, for example, just to start building a restorative mindset, at the beginning of your meeting, you could do a quick check-in question. You can say, hey, can everyone say their name and say, one thing they're proud of, one thing they hope for, right? Or as Addison mentioned, one of our best prompts is, which do you pour first, the cereal or do you pour the milk? And, sometimes that check-in question will take up a good 15, 20 minutes of the circle, just because, there's a lot of back and forth and friendliness and smiling, and kind of, ribbing each other a little bit starts to come out. or you can begin the meeting with a game. One of the games that we play is we call it, I think it's called Boom Bap Slap, where you put something in the middle between two people and you just tell them to touch your head, touch your shoulders, touch your wrists, and then you tell them to grab the item, and it turns into a competition. And this is something that we just did a few weeks ago with some young men who are in our Duval Detention Center, and we brought 5 or 6 police into the room, and you could feel the tensions immediately high once they saw, once the youth saw the police officers walk in. And then as we went through the name and the check-in and we played this game, all that tension just naturally melted away, and we were able to get into some shared storytelling where we were able to build relationships and see that commonality and that humanness that Addison has been mentioning throughout the conversation.
For sure. And even to add to that, what Abdul High saying, that instance of with the police and the young men, we caused the harm. We caused the harm when we brought the police officers in there, because they thought it was a group of kids about to get direct fire, and we had to repair harm within the circle and after the circle. But it all happened with building that introduction and stuff like that. There's things that we could have went over, and as restorative practice practitioners, that's things that we learn and we put in, because we're not perfect. We learn and we keep putting in and going over and seeing how can we do things better.
And that's where the closing comes in, because one of our closings is we do a GAP. So the G is for, something you identify, one thing you're grateful for, something you apologize for, or something that you praise. And so our closing that day, one of our closings was, identify how you felt when you first came in to the circle versus how you feel now. And as we started to go through the circle, we had about 3 or 4 youth say that they felt like they were going to catch another charge. Like they felt that they were going to be arrested and put in direct file, means, taken from the juvenile facility and put into, the adult facility. And so in that opportunity, I recognized it was a harm, and it gave me a chance to apologize and repair that harm, or at least identify that harm in real time. And as Dimitri said, we were able to take it back and say, hey, the next time we do this with our youth, we have to come in first and kind of preface what we're about to do, then bring the officers in, because the officers just walked in first and we came in behind them. So that's a restorative practice in itself. That is a restorative mindset in itself that Dimitri just mentioned. So any questions? We're almost done with the PowerPoint, so we have about 22 minutes left. And so again, we want to keep this open and have conversation, as we continue to go. So Addison, Dimitri, is there anything in the chat?
Yeah, we can start discussing in the Q&A here. So Our first one is this always pertaining to violence or issues police are involved in, or would it pertain to any kind of conflict resolution? Definitely any kind of conflict resolution. It can be as simple as 2 youth in kindergarten, and it can be, and we've had situations as serious as, a youth, 2 different young adults who are in prison for murder. So the spectrum is, the only real criteria is some type of conflict and people. So it's not always pertaining to violence.
Right. And if I could add to that, we also do this within, restorative justice in medicine. This is something that we're doing in that setting also.
Right.
So we're doing this with pediatricians at UF Health, University of Florida Health, and then also at the resident program at Ascension St. Vincent's. So we're doing this with doctors, physicians, and pediatricians. And we're really addressing, through building community, that those systemic harms. So we're not necessarily addressing the harms that have taken place. We are getting in circle and kind of just having some very safe conversations about some of the systemic issues that arise, not necessarily to solve them, but begin to just let them come up to the surface, let us identify them. And then as time progresses, then we can really start, honing in on what to address, how to address, and when to address.
Here goes a question for you right now, Abdul. Hi. Do you find because they are in a healthcare field versus a justice field, it is easier for them to connect with their clients? Justin Link said that.
So read that question one more time. Can you read that question one more time?
Do you find because they are in a healthcare field versus a justice field, it is easier for them to connect with their clients?
Yeah. So from what I've seen, these system of care providers in the juvenile justice system and these system of care providers that are in the health field, they have very similar experiences, right? Because if in the juvenile field, you're going to have those ones that have become jaded, right? They're going to scrutinize everything. They're going to start having these microaggressions and these biases and prejudice and these heuristics towards their constituent.
Right.
And we have seen the same exact thing in the health field, where a lot of not a lot, but physicians and pediatricians are saying, well, the youth are non-compliant, the adults are non-compliant. Why don't they do what they say? So we've seen that end of the spectrum, but then we've also seen system of care providers in the juvenile field and the health field incredibly empathetic. And I mean, they remind themselves and they understand themselves, or they understand why they're there every single day. So just to answer your question, we see it's a both and. So we see the disconnect in both sides, but we also see the extreme connection in both areas.
Because it always comes down to, like, they see the similarities in their stories growing up, or the similarities of what they might have growing up, so they compare it. And I think what we do big on is making the story individualized, making each thing individualized, so everything's not so comparable, and so you can see the truth within everybody's truth is a both and in the situation, not this versus that.
Yeah, so we hope we're answering your question. So if we haven't, please let us know. And are there more questions in the chat?
Yeah, I can do the next one. So How long do the victim offender circles last? Is it one long session or is it multiple sessions? It really comes down to what's agreed upon. So I've seen both. I've seen a session where the offender honestly just wants to say sorry to the family, and they don't get a chance to. They want to know about the person or the family of the victim, in that very, serious case of someone losing their life. That family just wants to tell them who that person was. Tell the offender who the victim was, what they like to do, who they were as a person. So it can be both. It can be both. I've honestly seen both. We have another one.
So currently, right now, with our expansion circles, with our youth, we usually do about 6 to 8 weeks. And when we initiate the restorative practice, when they come into the room, we really just start with, we're such and such, we're with the Center for Children's Rights, and we're here to have circles and have a conversation with you. But the two gentlemen who are in the circle, they know who each other are. And we let them naturally identify why they're there with us. And we don't really say anything about it. We just start with, we're such and such. Here's our circle. Here's what a circle is. Here are some basic community agreements. Do you want to add any? And then we go with the name and check-in. And the first couple circles, there's some tension in that circle. But then as we go back and reflect as restorative justice practitioners, when we design our next restorative practice, we'll create a situation where the youth have to maybe be on a team together, or maybe ask each other a question, right? As a way to kind of break that ice or that tension that exists. And then by the end of it, me, Addison, and Dimitri, we don't even talk because they're just naturally talking to each other. And we just sit in the room with them for an hour and they just talk. And they have so much in common. You know, it's absolutely incredible. Sometimes, like when we leave, like I get emotional on the way home because it's just such a beautiful thing. And then also understand that this thing is deeply rooted. Like these are cousins at some point, right? These are family members at some point who are on opposite sides. And then once that conversation begins to happen, they start to remind, like, oh, you remember such and such? How are they doing? How are they doing? And so me and Addison and Dimitri could just kind of sit there, and by the end of it, they're just talking to themselves or talking to each other. And
like
we're
a lot
just
of
there in
these,
the whole space.
especially a lot of the youth, they stay maybe 2 minutes down the road. Our first two youth stayed right around the corner from each other, knew each other since Pop Warner days. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And just like he said, it was deeply rooted. So it's like you had to choose a side. And I think that was big on it, to where they realized we're playing the same game. We just got on different jerseys. And how stupid is it? You know what I'm saying? Or how real is it? You know? So those are big things.
But we see this at the juvenile justice level, but we also see this with pediatricians.
Right.
You know, we did a circle for World Children's Day in November, and we had a pediatrician come into the circle, and you could tell that they did not want to be there at all. But by the end of it, you know, she was going around and giving people hugs and talking about how amazing the experience was, right? So we see this within youth, you know, but we also see this in highly educated adults also, kind of, you know, that transformation. And so sometimes the transformation happens in a circle, you know, in 1 hour, 2 hour circles. Sometimes it'll take 6, 8, 12 weeks. Just really depends on the person, as Addison said.
Yeah, we have another one. How do you all manage this work in creating and fostering a safe space in the current climate of social media?
I don't think social media. I think with the social media question, it's more so we bring that social media right into the prompts. We have a partner that works with us, Ed, and he's not on the call. He's a colleague, not partner, a colleague that works with us, and he's great on that. We bring that social media right into the space, because that's a big part of big part of everyone's lives. So again, we're meeting everyone where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
So that day we have a prompt, but they want to talk about something that happened on social media. We find a way to work that in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the thing when it comes to keyword safety in this space, we stick to those agreements. Mm-hmm. And social media isn't an exception. So you can bring a topic or an interest or a perspective from social media, but if it violates one of those agreements, we have to address it. But honestly, you don't see social media take prominence as much as you'd expect.
Right.
I know the view and the perception of teens, teenagers, youth, young adults, everyone's social media crazed, and that's everything. But when you bring them, when you set the proper stage of it being about humanity and humanness and human relationship, you don't see as much social media.
Mm-hmm.
I know outside looking in, I figured there would be, it'd be like the essence of everything, but it's not, surprisingly. It's not. And once you really break down, like the other person was saying, those barriers, once you break those initial barriers, social media isn't as important. Like the social media or the phones, like people aren't on their phones as much because they're actually engaged just as humans. And that's that takes precedence over anything. So we don't try to, I guess, to more directly answer your question, we don't try to like intentionally, premeditatively fight social media.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We don't look at, okay, this is going on social media, this is how we're going to combat it. We just focus on the humanness. We focus on these youth who are sharing communities, which all these youth are from the same communities. All of these young adults are usually from the same communities. Everyone we work with, they share some type of community, professional, physical, experiential. So that becomes the bulk, and that becomes the foundation of the conversation and of the discussion, and that kind of breaks the social media barrier on its own. In my
Yeah.
That goes
And if I could add real quick, Dimitri, and also it really breaks, because Florida is an incredibly temperamental state when it regards politics, with diversity, equity, and inclusion training and conversations and stuff like that. But using restorative practices, we're able to navigate that. And we haven't had any issues, having conversations with police officers and youth and, doctors and physicians, lawyers. We haven't had any of those issues because when we design the restorative practice, we're not directly addressing those things, right? We're creating very kind of open prompts. And if those conversations emerge or those experiences emerge and people highlight those, that's their story, that's their experience. And one of our agreements in the conversation, it's really not a conversation. A restorative practice is not really a conversation. It's an opportunity to share your experience and to share your story. So we've been really good at navigating that incredibly temperamental and volatile climate that exists here in Florida because of this restorative approach. So we're able to have conversations if they emerge. Again, it's not something we're looking to do, but if they emerge, we're able to have conversations about race and gender and orientation and economics. We're able to have all of those conversations in a very productive fashion and a very empathetic. It's very empathetic in the conversation.
For sure. And I think that goes into one of our last slides where it says considerations to keep in mind. Big things that we look for, 3 big things: regulation and co-regulation. That looks like what Addison says, keeping the circle safe. And how do we keep it safe? Going back to those community agreements, going back to calling it out, going back to being transparent. We see silence in space. If there's something deep, we don't have to talk through it and talk past it. We're big on taking that second. If we're hearing it, we're big on taking that second and letting the room just breathe. Intention and reflections. Those prompts and those things that we say are very intentional. So when we're getting ready for things, we want to be intentional, but staying in the moment at the same time. And the way we reflect on that is, tell me about something you heard someone say. Don't tell me who said it, just something that stuck out of your mind. So that's how we do that. That's how we reflect on what we may have heard, maybe to get that out. Then we got a couple extra things that we see on here. Next steps in restorative mindset practices. And I'll let Abdul Haya and Addison take away on the survey portion.
Yeah, of course. And I want to, Dimitri, I'm very glad that you mentioned that reflection piece, right? One way that we really close the loop, and it's a very subtle way of closing the loop, and it's a very subtle way of identifying the wisdom that emerged in the circle, as Addison mentioned, right? The wisdom is in the circle. The wisdom will naturally emerge if you create the space. And so we do a witness round, what Dimitri is talking about. And so this could be a next step, that you use in your work. One thing we say is, we do a witness round and we simply say, I heard someone say, and then that person just identifies it. And then we go to the next person. And we usually do 2 rounds of that. And it's a very nice way to get the circle to coalesce and kind of see what emerged from the conversation and kind of what feelings we walked away with. So that's a really, really good strategy to begin to use. And it's a really easy next step to implement. So we just want to mention too that again, restorative practices, it's about process, not outcome, and, it's, really common to say, it's very cliche to hear. But again, it's very hard to do because everybody, again, as I mentioned, when you put in A, you want B. When you have X, you want Y. And that's really not the way that we approach our restorative justice work or our restorative practice work. It's really the process. We focus on being restorative justice practitioners. We focus on being research practitioners, and we do a lot of PDSA cycles. So we plan, do, study, act, right? This is really what we do, and this is our reflection process as we do this. So Addison, do you want to add anything? I know we have about 4 minutes left.
No, that's beautiful. I'm just answering some of the Q&As through text.
Okay. So here, if you want to request a training with CCR, you want to keep in touch with us, please, use the QR code on the right over here. This will be a great way to get in touch with us. I know that we're all on LinkedIn also, so that's another way that you can keep in touch with us, and we can continue the conversation and answer any further questions that you have. And then also too, we kindly request that everyone do this participant survey. It's very, very short. It shouldn't take more than a couple minutes of your time, but it just really is gauging kind of your understanding of restorative justice, your ability to share ideas or be able to explain restorative justice and practices to other people now that you've sat through this conversation, and then just answer some questions about what are some ways that you can begin to implement it in your day-to-day work. All right, so we appreciate you joining us for today's session, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you and working with you in this work.
Thank you.
It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you everyone for being here today. That was awesome, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to every question in the Q&A, but I think Addison is trying to quickly get to some of those. So we're about to go into, at the top of the hour, we'll go into a 30-minute break. And then at 11 Eastern, Vanessa Williams will be our afternoon keynote speaker. And I hope to see you all there.
Can you put the QR code back up real quick, Abdul-Hai?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. All right, I'll leave it up there for a few minutes.
Yeah, I guess here's I don't know, here's a question. If you guess we've got 2 minutes, probably a minute 30 seconds. Our program has been trying to implement restorative practices, but have been running into some resistance from our rural communities. Do y'all have any suggestions for getting over the initial awkwardness / uncomfortableness of the activities?
I think that's a great. Addison is amazing. He's a master at doing that. So sorry, Addison, to put you on the spot, but that's what he does. That's what he does.
So a lot of it for me through my experiences is I ask more questions. I was kind of saying that also to the power dynamic question with pushback and unappreciation for the work. I ask more questions. I start there. If I've seen a lot of it is, especially in the rural community, people feel like their experience isn't valued or isn't seen. And you'll see in politics how that's like weaponized often. But people in rural communities feel forgotten. They feel like their experience isn't seen. They feel labeled, and so be it. So I just ask more questions. I get curious. I get inquisitive, and then we go from there. And as as I start to ask more questions, discussion emerges, and then people start to realize, oh wow, in many aspects, we're actually all the same. So that's definitely a way I've seen working with different types of communities and trying to navigate resistance. That's the thing. Resistance isn't always bad. We navigate it. We don't try to disintegrate it or break it down or kill it. Resistance is a natural human action and reaction to anything. So we navigate it because in resistance, there's energy, there's passion. So we try to use it. We try to use it for the right thing, the right causes, the right aims.
And another thing I could say, especially if you want this, do it with who wants to do it at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Then offer that space, leverage that space that you created with the people who want to do it with you, and leverage that space and let people be a part of it, and ask those people to be a part of it, hold them accountable. Then that's another way we went about it as well. Leverage the space that we already having.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people where
Start small. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Absolutely.
Well, we are 1 minute over, so I just want to be respectful of everyone's time, but also someone just said, can you go back to the slide with your steps on I really hope I do not butcher your name, Xochitl Sanchez. Also, if you go to the vertical bar on the menu, those stacked papers, this PDF will be in there for you to view and download. You can have it all for yourself.
Thank you all again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm going to end the session. Thanks everyone for being here.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.